Have you ever had that that unsettling thought, that genuine, independent, critical thought just seems to be quietly fading?
Mm-hmm.
And not because we're getting dumber, but because we're just, well, too busy,
Too distracted.
too distracted, or maybe even, too terrified to just sit still long enough to think.
Yeah.
It really feels like analysis has been replaced by just automatic reaction.
Yeah, and curiosity by convenience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into the forces behind this, the
Yeah.
technological, the cultural, the psychological, that are kind of dimming the light of independent minds.
Right. And our mission here is really to understand how our world became so structurally difficult for reflection.
And what we can actually do to reclaim our critical faculties.
The sources we've gathered, they all confirm the shift is profoundly real. The consequences are just immense. Most people really aren't engaging in true thought.
They're just reacting.
They're just reacting instantaneously to this relentless fire hose of headlines and social feeds.
And what's so important to get, right, is that this isn't a failure of individual intelligence.
Not at all. The shift was slow. It was systemic. I mean, the modern systems all around us, our tech, our education, corporate pressures, they've been built, whether intentionally or not, to encourage immediate compliance and quick emotional responses, not, deep, time-consuming questioning.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you feel like your brain is always humming, always processing, but never really concluding anything, we are diving into why the world has become, for your mind, simply too loud to think. So let's start with the input. I mean, the sheer volume of data we process every single day is...
It's just staggering. It really is.
We're living, you could argue, in the loudest moment in human history. And I'm not talking about sound. I'm talking about cognitive noise.
Right.
Just think about it. Every single day, you are hit with more messages, more notifications, more urgent updates, and these highly emotional takes.
Than someone in the 18th century would have encountered in their entire life.
Wow. Your internal processing system is basically maxed out before you've even had breakfast.
And this is the overload epidemic. It forces this fundamental shift in how the brain actually operates. And we can see this behavior mirrored in sophisticated systems outside the human body.
Okay, how so?
Well, the sources draw these analogies from the development of autonomous systems. Think about self-driving technology, for example.
Okay, like a Tesla.
Exactly. Engineers notice that when you flood a cognitive engine, even a really sophisticated one, with too many simultaneous inputs, its quality control just deteriorates rapidly.
So if that car is getting, say, 1,000 inputs a second, it can't possibly process all 1,000 of them carefully. It has to triage.
Precisely. It bypasses the deep, careful processing that's required for true analysis. Instead, it relies on instant
Pattern recognition.
And snap judgments just to survive the volume. It's not doing deep analysis. It's defaulting to what's familiar.
And for the human brain, that's not laziness, it's survival mode.
That's the key. It forms quick impressions based on mental templates, rather than spending all that energy to evaluate the specifics of every single new crisis or innovation or social drama.
You just don't have the bandwidth, so you react based on association.
You can't.
And this survival mode, it brings up this huge cultural side effect, which is the almost total loss of intellectual space.
Yeah.
We've become experts at filling every single potential gap in our day. We're terrified of the silence that comes with being in a line or on a commute or just a quiet evening.
We plug in, we scroll, we listen. It's constant stimulation.
But that constant input comes at a really high price.
It does. The sources all emphasize that we're terrified of boredom, but boredom is precisely where thinking happens.
Right.
When you stop forcing input into your brain, when you give it a break from jumping from one stimulus to the next, it finally gets the space it needs to make deep connections, to synthesize all that information, and to build a complex understanding.
Without that internal, quiet, critical thought, it can't even begin to gestate. And that structural reality, it forces us to look at the biology of it, because this overload feeds directly into the two main operating systems of our minds.
That's a critical link, yeah. I mean, research, a lot of it from understanding neural activity, clearly shows the brain operating in these two very distinct modes.
Okay.
First, you have fast mode. It's instinctive, automatic, quick, highly emotional, and extremely energy efficient. That's your mental default setting.
And then you have slow mode.
Right, which is analytical, deliberate, effortful, and incredibly powerful, but it consumes a vast amount of metabolic energy.
So the brain is, well, fundamentally lazy. It wants to stay in fast mode because slow mode is expensive.
Exactly. And given that information tsunami we just talked about, the brain has the perfect excuse to stay in that low-cost setting.
Absolutely. The modern world is engineered for speed, so our brains respond by just staying trapped in fast mode.
And when you're presented with a complex, nuanced issue, let's say a multifaceted economic problem, your brain just skips the analytical effort.
It doesn't switch to slow mode.
It doesn't. Instead of deliberating, it just asks, what does this new piece of information remind me of? It pulls up a pre-existing mental template, a quick emotional or tribal association, and responds based on that, not on the specific facts.
That makes perfect sense for speed, but
Yeah.
here's the insidious part. Fast mode doesn't just produce quick judgments. It immediately builds defenses around them.
Yes. Once an emotional stake is established, you feel angry or validated by a headline, the brain kicks into a defense posture.
This is confirmation bias.
This is confirmation bias at its strongest. Your fast mode brain will actively filter everything that comes next to confirm that belief. It'll dismiss or twist contradictory evidence just to maintain internal consistency.
To avoid that feeling of being wrong.
It's actively avoiding cognitive dissonance. And you're not consciously deciding to be closed-minded. The system is automatic. It's designed to protect your quick judgment.
And we see this play out constantly, right? People who are presented with irrefutable evidence that challenges their core political view, they don't back down. They often double down.
They become more convinced of their original position. It's a defensive feedback loop. And this behavior is amplified because our ancient mental shortcuts have been weaponized by technology.
What do you mean by that?
Well, historically, when information was scarce, the brain learned to trust ubiquity. If your whole community consistently repeated a piece of knowledge, it was likely true.
Repetition equaled reliability.
It was a safe bet, which, in a world without mass media, made total sense.
But what happens now?
Now, that biological shortcut becomes a major vulnerability. Today, a completely unfounded lie or a piece of emotionally charged misinformation can circle the entire globe in about, 6 seconds?
Wow.
It appears across dozens of feeds and platforms, and your brain, using that ancient heuristic, interprets seeing that claim everywhere, even if it's totally baseless, as validity.
So smart, educated people end up internalizing nonsense.
Exactly. Not because they lacked analytical capacity, but because the delivery system is exploiting a biological vulnerability that was designed for a totally different world.
So we've got these internal traps. The cognitive overload, the laziness of fast mode, the weaponized shortcuts. But these problems are just intensified by the external structures we live in every day.
That takes us into part 3, the systems built around us. And if we really analyze those systems, we see they often weren't designed to foster independent, questioning minds,
But rather,
compliant participants. A great example is the modern education model.
I think a lot of people assume the goal of school is intellectual growth, but the sources we looked at paint a far more pragmatic picture, don't they?
They really do. The structure of modern compulsory schooling was largely solidified during the industrial age, and its design was fundamentally practical, prepare large groups of people for factory work.
So teaching obedience, predictability, non-disruption.
Sitting in rigid, regimented rows for hours on end.
The system rewards conformity, coloring inside the lines, and crucially, memorizing and just regurgitating the answers the system expects on a test.
And that system actively discourages the core components of critical thinking. I mean, deep thinking takes time. Asking difficult foundational questions often disrupts the lesson plan.
Right, if you linger too long on one complex idea, you fall behind on coverage.
So the system subtly but powerfully teaches us absorption and compliance are rewarded. Thinking too deeply, challenging the premise, or taking too long is punished or just dismissed as inefficient.
And this behavioral pattern, it doesn't just vanish when we graduate, it intensifies in the corporate world. It leads directly to this phenomenon of the corporate cliff or destructive groupthink.
Absolutely. There's enormous pressure in any organization to avoid being that controversial dissenter. People learn very quickly that questioning the boss or challenging the consensus carries career risk.
You might get labeled a troublemaker, uncooperative.
Or simply lose status. The desire for harmony and belonging becomes a more powerful driver than the desire for truth or efficiency.
We've all been in that meeting. Someone knows the project logic is fatally flawed, but they stay silent.
They choose silence because the perceived cost of speaking up is higher than the perceived cost of the inevitable failure. And so the entire group just drives off a cliff together.
All because no one broke the consensus.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is how systemic compliance works. When questioning or dissent or challenging the established narrative carries a significant social or financial cost, societies stop thinking critically.
It's not because they can't.
It's because they're operating under the powerful constraint of fear. And fear, as the sources note, is a very effective tool for control.
And the most sophisticated delivery vehicle for that fear and compliance today is the algorithm.
Right.
That external pressure cooker was already boiling, and then social media came along and just poured rocket fuel on the whole thing.
And it's important to state up front, these platforms are engineering marvels, but they are operating under a fundamental conflict of interest.
Exactly. Their design goal is not to improve your understanding of the world. It is strictly to maximize engagement.
Clicks, shares, comments, and crucially, time spent on the platform.
And understanding, nuance, deliberation. Those things actively decrease engagement because they require you to stop scrolling and actually start thinking.
And we know what maximizes engagement. It's emotional triggers.
Outrage.
Conflict, tribalism, simple narratives, extreme positions. The algorithms don't just prefer this content. They actively learn what triggers an emotional response, anger, validation, fear, superiority specifically in you, and then they constantly feed you more of the same to keep that loop going.
So you're placed inside this engineered echo chamber.
And that's where the insidious comfort is. It feels incredibly validating. You get dopamine hits from community affirmation. You feel informed. You constantly feel right.
But you are not thinking critically.
You are being expertly managed. The algorithms, which are often designed by brilliant engineers who understand human psychology better than we understand ourselves, they bypass slow mode entirely and just target your emotional reflexes.
That sounds like the perfect definition of a rigged game. Complex issues get reduced to these easily digestible slogans.
Nuance is treated like a threat to engagement.
And the most extreme, simplest voices get the loudest microphone. The source material accurately calls this the perfect engine for collective stupidity.
It maximizes emotional energy while minimizing intellectual investment.
Okay, so we've laid out the walls, the overload, the biological traps, the compliance systems, and this algorithmic management. The crucial final step is, how do we start breaking free? How do we reclaim clarity?
It begins with the profound and kind of radical act of relearning how to slow down.
Simple as that.
Deep thinking requires time. And if we want the brain to switch into slow mode, we have to demand it through enforced rest. We have to actively resist that cultural pressure to have an immediate, hot take on everything.
Okay, practically speaking, what does that look like? I mean, it sounds nice, but my phone is buzzing constantly.
It means consciously choosing to read less, but reading more carefully. Instead of skimming 20 headlines, spend an hour really wrestling with the concepts in a single detailed article.
Okay.
It means embracing the power in the pause, that deliberate space between encountering an idea and forming your reaction. That pause is where your critical questions live. It's the doorway to slow mode.
And that leads right to the second step, which is embracing discomfort. We have to actively seek out perspectives we disagree with.
Yeah, and not to attack them or refute them immediately.
But to genuinely understand the logic that supports the opposing position.
And that is the path to real intellectual growth. It forces you to realize that the issue is likely far more complex than your initial template suggested, or that, that your confidence in your own view was maybe premature.
But this requires overcoming the deepest barrier of all.
Which, as we said earlier, is emotional, not intellectual. What's so fascinating here is that the deepest resistance to critical thinking is the emotional cost. For many people, their core beliefs, their politics, their community views, their cultural tribe, they're not just facts. They're integral to their identity.
So questioning those beliefs feels like questioning who they are.
Exactly. It feels terrifying at a fundamental level. And that emotional threat is why people avoid information that might cause discomfort. They stay in their curated bubble because it feels safe, certain, and socially compliant.
Even if it's a mental prison that limits their understanding of the real world.
Right. So the core internal shift that's required is, well, it's courage and integrity. Critical thinking isn't just an intellectual exercise. It really is a spiritual act. It demands that you honor truth over comfort and that you choose challenging growth over the safety of certainty. You have to be fundamentally willing to stand alone and be wrong.
So we've covered the crushing information overload, the biological vulnerability of fast mode thinking, the systemic push for compliance from school to work, and the algorithmic management of our attention. The quiet revolution we're talking about is the result of choosing clarity over all of these pressures.
And the strength you gain from that choice is profound. You become genuinely harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, and harder to control. And what's more, this change influences others, just through example.
How so?
People notice when someone refuses to get swept up in the latest wave of hysteria, when they pause to reflect, when they ask the necessary, complex questions that everyone else is avoiding.
This raises an important question that I think summarizes everything we've discussed today.
It really distills down to one essential daily choice that we all face multiple times a day. Will you expend the energy to think for yourself, or will you let others, the system, the algorithm, the crowd, think for you?
And that choice determines your clarity, your freedom, and your capacity to navigate this complex world with wisdom and integrity. The source material suggests this quiet revolution isn't about creating more noise or outrage. It's about choosing awareness, choosing clarity over comfort every single time you pause to reflect instead of just reacting. So what will your next choice be?